10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good golly mouse molly. Welcome everybody to the show. Hope you enjoyed the opening montage put together at no expense whatsoever, but at great length. And I hope you spotted this is a montage of songs from Who's Next, not necessarily from the album versions, obviously, and live stuff. And there's a little bit of an anomaly in there, which I think somebody in the chat may have realized that. Who was singing Going Mobile? Who was that? It was a Townsend, but it wasn't Pete. It was Simon, because that's not a song that the Who performed live that I'm aware of until maybe very recently or recent years, but Roger Daltrey did. and Simon Townsend was on guitar with them. So there you go. So that was the opening montage for the show tonight, where we're going to return to one of my most beloved bands. Can you guess who they are? Can you guess who they are? It's The Who. And in particular tonight, we're going to talk about the epic 1971 album, Who's Next? Born from the ashes of Pete Townsend's ambitious Lifehouse project, Who's Next became the band's biggest commercial success and remains to this day one of the greatest albums in rock music history, in my biased opinion, of course. So let's fire up the amps, set the lasers to stun, and prepare for the might. This is The Who at their peak. Welcome to you all, and welcome to my dear friend, Pope. How are you, sir?
Doing good. And, who may be next? But the real question is, who's on first?
Who's on first? Well, indeed, I have, and guess who? No, they're on second. No, I have that clip for Harry Shearer, I think it was, and some other guys back in the day.
Costello did it initially, but oh man,
yeah, but there's the rock music version of it.
Oh, is there?
Perhaps I'll play that later. Where the promoters talking to the agent, he goes, "So the Who are first, and you'll set them to line up for the festival." And it's got the Who and the Guess Who and U2, and it goes on like that. So it's a reworking of the Abbott and Costello. But anyway,
I think I have heard that, and Yes is in there somewhere.
Yes are in there. Who else is playing? Yes. Who's playing? Yes. I do have that clip. Maybe we'll play it later because it is Christmas, so we should play something funny and amusing. As you can see, not a lot of effort going in Christmas-wise to the show. I do have my Sabaton Christmas sweater here, though.
There you go.
It's too hot to wear it right now, but so the Sabaton Christmas sweater with thank you Santa on the back.
There you go.
So anyway,
I hope everybody's excited for the Christmas Panzer to come around.
The Christmas Panzer. That'd be a great title for a song, wouldn't it? I mean, we can see that on a future Sabaton album. The Christmas Truce of Christmas Panzer.
They do like an actual Christmas carol with Santa driving a tank around handing out presents.
Yeah. So hello to everybody in the chat. Tim is here, FKHC. Davina, Dustin's listening in while doing the dishes. Good man, doing some domestic work. Mike DiCarlo is here. He is saying, "Do you have the Stars game on?" I do. And Christian Delorme has not just become a member; he has been a member for 4 months at the groupie level. As Christian here is, thank you for that message, Christian. It's a shame you can't join us tonight because obviously you're welcome. But bonsoir, everybody. Shift change, so I get to catch you both tonight. Well, there you go. That's very nice. And for you, obviously, being at the groupie level, we have to play something for you. That would be this. So good to see you, Christian. All right, there we go. So the Who. We did the Who. How many years ago did we do that Who show? 3 years ago?
It's got to be 3 years ago now, because that was, I think, the first show I was on.
So it was part of rock music history.
Indeed.
Yes, many years from now, archaeologists will uncover those YouTube videos, and they'll mark the occasion that you were first on the show with me. And I'm so pleased you've stuck around.
Yeah, much to our eternal regret, we're both still here.
We are both, we haven't quite become rich yet, and all that stuff. But we do have a lot of great supporters of the channel and people that listen to our channels, and not Christmas messages as such, but I'd like to thank them all. Thank you all for your support through the year, and I'd like to thank you, Pope, for sticking with me through all this stuff.
Absolutely, and without the chat and without everybody supporting us, I mean, we'd still be here talking about it, but we'd be much sadder about
it. Instead of 9 concurrent viewers, we'd have 0. But so let's Yeah, I mean, The Who is something I could talk about all the time, but I've resisted doing another show, and I thought rather than do just like a Who Part 2 and make it general, I'd really focus in on one album, which is Who's Next, because it's a lot more easy to manage a show when you're just talking about one album.
Especially when you have a band with a discography like The Who, where it spans 4 decades and has
I
God knows
know.
how many albums and then compilations and all sorts of other stuff.
Well, that's right. And Who's Next has played a major part in my life over the years. So released in August 1971. So not that not that I could claim at that young age, because I was still pretty young then, that I knew the difference between good rock and other stuff. But it did make an impact on me. I do remember particularly as I had older siblings that had this album, and a lot of the hip kids at school. Oh, have you heard that Who album? So I was getting in, just starting to discover what rock was, opposed to just what you heard on the radio and the charts. Even though I was still pretty young. So it was one of those albums that made a big impact on me and has remained very impactful for me over the years. We'll get into that a little bit more, but what makes this album so enduring, and why was it so good at the time? But before we get started on that, Christian Delorme and his wonderful vinyl revival channel, check it out over in Rumble. Sorry I couldn't make the CCR show, Christian, but I believe Queen are next up on Sunday. So $5 Canadian from Christian, Super Chat. Something I learned from you boys about the Who stream: Squeezebox is not an accordion. That's true. Mama has a squeeze box she wears on her chest.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get no rest. So thank you for that. $5 super chat, Christian. That definitely deserves some kind of clip to be played. Where's the one I'm looking for? Well, if I can't find the one I'm looking for, then it's going to have to be...
Let's rock! Let's rock!
Let's rock.
Let's rock, Duffy.
Let's rock and roll.
Let's rock!
Indeed. So thank you, Christian. But yes, Who's Next? With that iconic cover, and I mean, iconic is a very overused word, of course. But no one can forget this cover once they've seen it. It's the Lads. And we'll talk a little bit about the cover later. The deluxe edition, which has got lots of extra bonus tracks. The one I really want is the super deluxe edition, but I can't afford it. So it's like $250, and
That's the unfortunate part. Is all the stuff we really want, we can't afford.
Yeah, I can't quite justify it, but it is a beautiful piece of work, including a 170-page graphic novel of the Lifehouse story that Pete was trying to make that nobody could understand, and ended up with Who's Next being made instead, with about 9 CDs worth of music in it. So one of these days, maybe I'll get it for Christmas. Who knows?
Well, let's be honest. You can justify it to yourself. Justifying it to the one who actually controls the money,
that's right. Story. Look what I spent some of your pensions on, my dear. So the Super Deluxe Edition, 9 tracks on the original release. Bonus tracks were obviously on the subsequent reissues, and Super Deluxe, as I say, has got about 9 tracks of material, 9 CDs of material. A concise but brilliant 9 tracks. We'll talk about each track in detail at some point going forward. At least 3. I mean, you could call it the CSI album, I guess.
Well, yeah, almost all but the original are on here.
It's bookended it's bookended with Bob O'Reilly and Won't Get Fooled Again. But there's at least 4. I mean, it's arguable. 4 stone cold classics that are.
I mean, 5 of them off of this album are in regular music rotation on every classic rock station.
That's right. Yeah. So they really nailed it on this one. And despite the overplaying of classic rock on classic radio, rock radio of Babo O'Reilly and Won't Get Fooled Again, it shouldn't detract or take away from the power of those magnificent songs. And we'll talk about each track in detail. The rear cover there actually was taken at Leicester's de Montfort Hall backstage, one of the major theatre gigs on the circuit in those days. Probably still is this day. I've been there a couple of times for gigs. Just a lot of famous bands played there back in the day. But it was born out of this abandoned project of Pete's called Lifehouse. And we're going to talk about that in detail. The main sessions for the album were recorded between April and June 1971. That is the beyond the Lifehouse sessions, live sessions that the band tried to get going. Some sessions were recorded in New York at the record plant, which they then abandoned those sessions because some of the temptations in New York were a little strong for certain members of for Kit Lambert, the manager, and Keith Moon particularly, were getting a little too much into the temptations of New York. So the sessions were not really going anywhere. So Keith in particular was enjoying the New York nightlife.
Well, that's hardly a change from any other city he's in.
But he was actually kind of taking some stuff that he shouldn't. Kit Lambert certainly was. So they decamped back to England, to this small cottage, this shack in the country called Stargroves, which was Mick Jagger's pied-à-terre. How could anyone live in such cramped squalor?
Well, I mean, you do what you have to for your art, even if you have
to. You suffer for your art. Many albums, of course, were recorded here. A lot of bands used it, and they used it because there's some of the inside. What it looked like inside. Pete's not looking too happy. Because they used the Rolling Stones mobile. Hell, we should do a whole show on the Rolling Stones mobile studio one day, because that's been used by so many bands. A rather unassuming truck on the outside. But inside, they fit a whole studio in there, so it was ideal for using country houses to record stuff. And then finally, they didn't use too much from Stargroves. Finally, ended up at Olympic Studios in London, where they had something like 12 or 16 tracks by then. The Olympic was a pretty up-to-date studio, so it did give them a lot of opportunities sonically. So Olympic was a good move for them. So the album was released, as I say, in August 1971, reached #1 in the UK album charts and #4 on the Billboard charts in America. Estimated to have sold something like 14 million copies worldwide, which isn't huge compared to certain albums, but it's pretty big. Still pretty big. Didn't make the Who poor. Tommy had made them rich, but before that they were poor, mainly because they kept having to pay off equipment.
Well, if Pete would stop smashing it every chance he gets.
The 9th biggest seller in 1971. It contains at least 3 tracks. As we said, there are other classics in there, but 3 tracks that are universally known and beloved. You Won't Get Fooled Again, which if you ever hear the single edit that was a hit single, it's like you're taking a 9-minute track and making it into 3 minutes. It's not not good. You got Babo O'Reilly, of course, and Behind Blue Eyes, 3 of their most iconic songs. I mean, I would probably throw Bargain in there as another one, which is an absolute stone cold classic. But, but the Who, 1971 Who, very interesting band, because it's only 7 years after their 1964 start, and yet radically different band and sound. And talk about progression, but they had really moved quite a bit forward alongside rock, if not driven some of that movement themselves.
In a lot of ways, they were the most, I don't want to say progressive, but they had changed the most from their original start than either the other of the big British bands, the Beatles or the Stones. Both kind of maintained that core of what their sound was the whole way through, and they just added new tech and new techniques and stuff on top of it. The Who entirely changed their sound for pretty much from album to album until this point.
It's possible. I mean, we could argue the point all day with different bands about who truly became a band that progressed, and the Who have to be, for me, right up there at or near the top as one of the most influential bands in rock. They created, especially with Who's Next, possibly the template for rock albums, rock bands going forward. I mean, they were a behemoth of a live act as well, but they finally managed to get some of that power down on the album, because they only had
to have a different sound to a record. Like the only one I could say that kind of went more bold in that direction is maybe David Bowie.
Yeah, and Hunky Dory was the album that was out in 1971 for Bowie. So he was already on his fourth album. This is Who's Next is only the Who's fourth studio album in 7 years. They were notoriously slow at getting albums out, especially after Tommy took them so long to make.
Yeah.
They were kind of almost known as, in some respects, as more of a live act than an album act. Who's Next would change a lot of that, I think. Here they are. So they started as this kind of mod soul R&B band, and kind of became this sharp, dynamic, aggressive rock band, this auto-destructive thing going on.
Funny that in their mod phase, they came out with a song like My Generation, which was kind of a precursor to punk rock.
Yeah, so they had all those punky, sharp edges. Power pop as well. Always fantastic. And one of the dualities of the Who, and it's even on Who's Next as well. In fact, Tommy as well. Monstrously loud, heavy band live, but some of the records could be extremely melodic, harmonically complex, and very, very smartly put together arrangement-wise. So they were this kind of schizophrenic act.
Well, I think part of that too is the recording tech of the day. I mean, if you played how the Who do live in a studio, you just blank out the equipment.
Yeah.
Like it would just hit the noise gate instantly.
Yeah. So they just, their skills in the studio were very, people, if they just saw them live, would say, well, there's a really bludgeon Raffola heavy rock band. But in the studio, some beautiful, beautiful songs, a lot of acoustic stuff, a lot of melodic stuff. Great harmonies. So they were very skilled in the studio despite their fearsome live reputation. Good evening, Joe.
How you doing, brother?
I'm doing very well. Hey, Joe.
Somebody needs to get Pete Townsend a sandwich. I mean, God almighty.
Well, these are skinny English kids. I mean, come on. These guys never ate. It's still coming out of the Second World War, starving. So the second album, The Who Sell Out, was kind of almost, it wasn't really a concept. It was kind of a concept album based upon advertising and radio spots and stuff. So they were starting to experiment with concepts, changing the sound a little. Then, of course, there's Tommy, which is, I mean, they helped pioneer the whole idea of a rock concept album.
Yeah.
First with The Who Sell Out, and then a rock opera, Tommy.
Yes.
Because there's lots of great interviews with Pete saying, Kit Lambert, the manager, would be like, Pete would say, look, the story's really rough here. This isn't good. He goes, well, don't worry, dear boy. Operas have always got terrible stories. So he would urge him on. And then, of course, they became this powerhouse hard rock band live. And the only one of the big British bands that did Monterey, Woodstock, and the Isle of Wight, three of the seminal live festival experiences in rock. They headlined all three of those.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is, not your Beatles or your Stones or whatever. It was the Who that did all that. So, and live, they were just, I mean, we've all seen the clips. Some of them are in montage at the beginning. They're just this fearsome, possibly the best live band in the world. I mean, lots of people could argue who was and who wasn't, and I didn't see them live at that time, just seen footage.
Certainly at this time, they were right up there with the very loudest and most aggressive bands in the world.
Oh, yeah. Touring relentlessly, putting on a show, arranging the songs into these monstrous hard rock behemoths from some of the much more poppy or lighter acoustic recordings in some instances. So, and then out of all that, of course, made what is my favorite live album of all time, Live at Leeds, 1970, the deluxe edition particularly, which has got the entire gig. It's a hard rock sonic experience like no other. A mountain of sound, as it was described at the time. So this was the way they developed and progressed. So a very different band from 1964, but still with the same personalities.
Yeah,
it's funny too when you take a guy who didn't grow up in that era like me, like my parents' generation, like they would remember the '60s stuff and this. Yeah. Whereas I grew up on this era of the Who, and then listen to their early stuff. I'm like, this is the same band.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if you take "The Kids Are All Right," the song, and then compare it to "Young Man Blues" on the Live at Leeds, it's
my favorite song by him. I'm pretty sure it came out in the '80s.
Eminence Front.
Eminence Front. That's my favorite one they ever did.
I'd say it was the last Stone Cold classic. I mean, not that Endless Wire and other later stuff wasn't quite good, but Eminence Front is just groovy, groovy track. So anyway, there they were in coming off Tommy and then Live at Leeds. Still only made three studio albums in 1971. So Pete had this idea, which we're going to talk about for a little while, because the songs all ended up in Who's Next, and you can hear in the songs the ideas he was trying to get forward. Lifehouse, he said, let's make this multimedia experience called Lifehouse. It'll be a film, and it'll have live gigs, and it'll have this, and it'll have that, and it'll all be this evolving experience. And it was really a dystopian science fiction rock opera, which revolved around sorry, that's the young Vic, we'll come back to that. Revolved around he never got the idea across to many people at the time successfully, but looking back on it, it was a story about a world where music and individuality were suppressed by a controlling government, where people lived in isolation, connected only through a thing called the grid.
Wow.
Precursor to the internet.
Wow.
And wore virtual reality life support suits where everything was fed to them, all their experiences. They didn't go out, they didn't do stuff.
You mean like cell phones? Wow.
Cell phones, VR, whatever. So he was presaging the internet, VR, censorship, dystopian censorship.
Sounds like the modern UK, really.
Yeah. Well, it's ironic that he was very close to what would happen like 50 years later, So, and it was the central character was a rebel called Bobby who discovers the transformative power of live music and begins a quest to bring people together through an actual concert, hoping to spark a universal connection. So he imagined this whole thing as not an multimedia thing, a film, live performances. The audience was meant to participate. And
it sounds a lot like Styx's, what was the name of that tour they did? The Mr. Roboto tour. It sounds like they were definitely influenced by this.
I would imagine so, yeah. But it was this very forward-looking dystopian story. He envisaged that audiences at concerts would feed back stuff into computers that would then generate theme songs for them that the band would play, and linking their identity to music. So it was a really radical utopian but dystopian idea, as Pete said. It wasn't all about utopia, it was about the consequences of these things. So it was one that was decades ahead of its time, I think.
Oh, these days this would be an absolute sensation, and people would be lined up around the corner to go talk about it.
Oh, now it works. I mean, now he's done elements of it in shows and stage plays and whatever.
And part of it is because that's closer to where we are now than ever before.
Yeah.
In the 70s, everyone was looking at it through the lens of the Cold War, like that's that Soviet stuff. No, we wouldn't be doing that ever.
Yeah. So they really, I mean, he was writing all these songs, and one of the things they tried to do was get these a concert venue called the Young Vic in London, who Pete was on the board of, said, well, why don't we put these concerts on and play the songs, and we'll get the audience to participate in the development of that. That didn't kind of work out too well because, as John and others said, well, we got a bunch of, because it was free to get in to do this. So they says, well, we got a bunch of 13-year-olds and freaks and hippies and skinheads, and they all want to go home for their tea just as we were getting. So it was all very chaotic, and they never got the audience taking part in it in that way that Pete wanted, So it didn't really. The good thing was it got them to play the songs live many times before they ever recorded them. So it was a grand concept, but the execution of it was kind of overwhelming. This is on stage at the Young Vic. Glyn Johns, the sort of producer, and Kit Lambert just couldn't translate this very multimedia vision into reality because it's very complex and abstract, and the rest of the band were kind of, this is great, but we don't quite get it. And I remember one of the famous sayings that Roger made was, because this thing, Pete envisaged everybody in the world in the story connected on this grid, and so Roger says, where are we going to get enough wire? Thinking of the practicalities. We're going to get enough wire, are we? So fabulous idea, well ahead of its time. But Pete was deeply invested in it, but unfortunately, it kind of broke him a bit. He was kind of crumbling under the weight of the project because he just couldn't get it. And there was all sorts of, Universal had offered $2 million for the script of the movie on it, and then withdrew that. And
Wow. It's a shame they didn't get off the ground, because the one I was talking about with Styx, I just looked it up. It's called Caught in the Act, and if you want to see it, it's an hour and a half long. It's on YouTube. They have the full show on there, and it uses their library of songs to tell a story about a dystopian future where there's censorship. I mean, everything you were saying, it sounds exactly like that. It has like a 10-minute movie that starts the show and everything, and I can't help but think that they may have been,
Lifehouse was
inspired by the work that Pete Townsend was trying to do.
Well, this is back in 71. So Pete, I think a lot of people have taken inspiration from Lifehouse over the years. But in terms of the Who, after these gigs at the Young Vic, Kit Lambert and others said, you know what, let's just kind of bring this back down to earth. Can't agree on how it's going to take any further shape, as it were. So let's just make an album. Let's take some of the songs and make an album. An good old fashioned album. So yeah, end up in the deluxe edition. That I'd love to buy, the super deluxe edition, a graphic novel of it, and there's been a radio play and stage play and whatever. So. So Pete not looking too happy.
Right. Does he ever look happy? I mean, he always looks angry.
But the main thing, apart from the fact that they had written like 20 songs, which they'd played live on these Young Vic sessions for Lifehouse, at least they had the songs and they all knew them and they'd worked on them. So when they did finally get to Olympic Studios and started recording them, that helped that they'd done all that. So it shows in the fact that they were familiar with a lot of the material and what Pete wanted to do with it. So Pete, and obviously the key players, Pete Townsend, who was big experimenter with new sound potential, which is where a lot of the synthesizer work comes in on this. His own little studio. He was meticulous at recording demos. And he did that, a lot of that stuff, which I've got pictures of the equipment, and here's one of them with organ played through a ARP synthesizer. to get that rhythm, and he was using it as a rhythm sound as those keyboards, as opposed to a solo instrument, which was quite unique and novel at the time. So, but mainly the main songwriter was a lot of the burden of it fell on him. You can see the equipment he was dealing with to make that synthesizer sound you get on Babo O'Reilly and Won't Get Fooled Again. And he did use some of the synthesizer work, going mobile particularly. They put the guitar through it as well to do some stuff. So quite ahead of his time with a lot of that as well. But still, phenomenal guitar player. Now, Roger actually said, he's noodling about with all these synths, and I consider we've got one of the world's greatest guitarists in our band. So, maybe he was a bit less keen on that in some respects, Roger.
Well, in a way, that kind of mirrors what Rush would go through about a decade later, where, Geddy was really like whole hog into the synthesizer and wanted to do a whole synth album. Meanwhile, they have an outstanding guitarist in Alex Lifeson who's just like, well, what am I supposed to do?
What am I doing here? Yeah,
right.
Roger, of course, had really come into his own as a frontman by this time. Like Tommy kind of created him as a frontman. His persona, taking on that persona, he became a real rock god frontman as opposed to kind of as a singer in a mod band, So by this time, he was a great interpreter of Pete's material and put himself into the voice of a lot of those songs. Interesting enough, Pete does sing some of them as well, but Roger is fabulous interpreter, and you can hear it. I think he's at his best almost in this period vocally. I mean, he's just power but control.
Yeah,
fabulous.
The Tommy soundtrack. I mean, Pinball Wizard's one of my favorite songs ever.
Yeah,
and wow.
And then we had exactly, and Roger really took. He was the one, I think, that reinvented himself as a singer because of Pete's writing and things, the things who were doing. So, and then there was Thunderfingers himself, the man who says, "I'm not a bass player, I'm a bass guitarist," Mr. John Entwistle. And there's lots of videos which I'd love to show, but they all get copyright blocked or claimed, which is of him just demonstrating how he made that sound. It's the sound where people say, "Where's that guitar coming from?" Well, it wasn't. He was playing the bass. So very high treble, very loud, obviously, and amped up. And just these fantastic, elaborate bass runs. He wasn't just plinking, So huge component. And he did the brass stuff. So the brass on My Wife, his song, it's John playing all the different brass instruments and then putting it together. And I do love this outfit that he used to wear. The skeleton one is just the best. And then, of course, there was some guy called Keith Moon.
This dude that ran with him.
This dude, yes.
He hit the buckets pretty good, huh?
He did. Kick the bucket there. Force of Nature. Here he is with some unknown guy. I have no idea who that is.
Another, random bass player.
Random bass player. Keith, as we know, was a very flamboyant drummer. There's lots of clips out there. I wanted to show many of the clips from the classic albums episode on Who's Next. I might show one, but they're all blocked or claimed afterwards, so I didn't want to have to cut the stream to shreds afterwards. But a lot of them explaining, Glyn Johns explained that Keith would play the drums along with the vocal. So he wasn't trying to keep up with the bass and have a rhythm section. He was trying to keep up with the vocalist.
Well, that's one thing I've always loved about Keith Moon as a drummer is, normally the drummer is there to kind of keep time, keep the rhythm, and then kind of embellish and fill in where he can. Yeah. Whereas Keith is just pure chaos behind the drum kit. Great.
And I think on this album, Who's Next, I think he plays his best studio work for a variety of reasons. One is he's not yet too out of it, but sorry, Keith. But Glyn Johns, who was the co-associate producer, Pete really was the producer, but Glyn Johns produced, engineered, mixed, did a lot of stuff. he said he convinced Keith to keep those flamboyant fills down a bit and just use them when they'll be most effective rather than constantly doing it, which live he does a lot. It's constant fills all the time. So he has dialed some of that down a bit on Who's Next and then lets the dogs out when it's appropriate. So I think that works great. It is some of his best studio work, particularly on tracks like Going Mobile, which is really a three-piece. It's Pete singing, playing acoustic guitar, John on bass, and Keith on drums. And they did the basic track live. What you hear on the album is pretty much it, live. And they're playing as a trio, and Keith really works effectively on that track beautifully. So, because he could be easy to overwhelm, just keep Pete singing and an acoustic guitar playing. And he didn't. He just complemented it. So he also had an interesting year apart from Who's Next. He was playing a hot nun in Frank Zappa's 200 Motels, which, well, you know, not a great movie. I've seen it. Not a great movie, but an interesting performance nonetheless. And then he compared, as it was his wont, he compared for the band Shana Na, their Christmas show in New York, I think, in drag. So
that guy looks like he has a lot of fun. Good Lord.
He did seem to like dressing up in drag a lot when you see the adverts for Who's Next with the posters. So he had an interesting year, Keith, you know, possibly peak Keith year for artistically, maybe. But there were the other two main players in the band. As Roger said, or John said, it was, you know, kind of Roger, I think, said it was really six people in the Who because there are two managers. Kit Lambert, who's the guy on the left side of the photograph, and then Chris Stamp, brother of Terence, Neil before Zod, you know.
Yeah.
So they were the co-managers of the Who from like 64 to 74, and they were heavily involved in everything they did. Kit Lambert particularly was a very close collaborator with Pete around developing his ideas, or basically saying that, as Roger said, he's the only one who could tell Pete something was good or not good because he wouldn't accept it from the rest of the band. So
wow.
Yes. So poor Kit Lambert, of course, one of the reasons they withdrew from the New York sessions was Kit Lambert was getting a bit of a habit of, you know, stuff. So he was on a bit of a downward slide, unfortunately. But very, very instrumental to the Who's rise, those two guys. So the other guy that was very important, of course, there was Glyn Johns. He got an associate producer credit, but really, as he said, as well as doing some production work, he engineered and recorded the album, mixed it, put the running order together, all that. Legendary British producer, still alive and kicking. I'm glad to say, 82. Here he is with the Beatles, doing Get Back stuff, Let It Be, Get Back stuff. Worked with the Stones, the Who, Kinks, Led Zeppelin, the Eagles. First few Eagles albums were all produced by him. I mean, the list goes on and on, like just thousands of them. Beggar's Banquet, he was involved in as an engineer on Beggar's Banquet, which we did a stream on recently. So, legendary guy. I'm glad he's still around with us. Seen a lot of rock history, that guy did. So, we briefly mentioned earlier the album cover. It was designed by someone called Kosh, but photographed by Ethan Russell. And the cover famously depicts the band members standing by this monolithic concrete structure they just relieved themselves on.
Oh,
But the sordid truth is that only Pete actually relieved himself on it. The others, for whatever reason, couldn't do it, and they just threw water on it to make it look like it. So Pete was the only one that carried through. It's kind of a reference, supposedly, to 2001.
Yeah, I can see that because that was only, 2 years old?
Yeah. kind of a reference to 2001. It's a filmed. They found this thing. It's on a slag heap. Do you guys know what a slag heap is?
Yep.
Yeah, it's basically just the shit that's left over from mining and quarrying, and it's dumped in a big pile, and they call it a slag heap. And this concrete structure was there. They found it on the road between Sheffield and Leicester. So they just went, wouldn't this make a good album cover? But why don't we urinate on it first?
Great.
So they're taking the piss. So great, because it turns out to be, I mean, it was always a cover, even as I kept going, oh, look at that. Look how daring that cover is. Look what they're doing, you know. And they're all walking away, zipping up and whatever. So but yeah. And as the back cover was at Leicester de Montfort Hall. So the album, let's talk about the album then and the songs. So we kind of got to the point where they're recording the damn thing at Olympic. Universally praised for its production, songwriting, and innovation. Possibly the Who's most celebrated album. I mean, many other Who albums have their devoted fans. It's like choosing between your children. Who's Next is certainly, it stood the test of time very well, as we were talking about Pope and I before you got here, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's one of these albums that sounds like a 70s album, not a leftover 60s album.
Right.
I don't know what it is and how it happened, but it sounds like a 1970s rock album. So in the space of like a year or two, where some bands were still sounding like they were recording stuff in the 60s.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I get what you're saying. Yeah.
So
they had actually stepped over into the new decade. Yeah.
Yes, they had successfully progressed and stepped over into the new decade. And I think that meant they set a template for hard rock and rock albums going forward with that. And we can talk about later some of the competition they faced and whether or not they were doing the same things or not, but possibly made them the greatest rock band in the world at that time. Possibly. I mean, that's always going to be an argumentative statement. But
well, I'd say at this point, they were sort of the standard bearer for hard rock in that they were musically more progressive than any of the other major bands had been. They were still together through the 60s, which the Beatles couldn't claim.
Yeah.
They were still mostly coherent, which the Stones were nowhere near at this point.
Well, the Stones were making some great albums, but they were very, very much making more bluesy rock and roll, rhythm and blues based things still.
True, I admit in their personal lives, but yeah, they were still at the top of their game at this point. But they're still very much, like you say, in that 60s blues based rock mode.
Yeah.
Whereas these guys had, like you said, make a full and complete break into a new
absolute
sound.
Progression into a new sound. Yeah, so rightly celebrated 70s album. It's actually interesting. We do have to say which century now.
True.
I keep forgetting we're in the 21st century. Yeah.
Right.
If I can still be talking about albums in 2170, I'll be happy.
Well, the funny part is we're almost at the point where we're closer to the 2070s than we are to the 1970s.
Yeah.
Well, Living Alpha's right. I mean, it was more cycles than the decades never line up. It's cycles of music.
Yeah.
And I think the Who were 70. I think Who's Next was an exemplar of a rock cycle. But anyway, you know, the use of synthesizers and sequencing and the ARP synthesizer sounds like on Baba O'Reilly Won't Get Fooled Again was pretty groundbreaking. I mean, it wasn't that they hadn't been used or heard before, but a lot of it was what Pete was doing was making a rhythm with it. But as he said, and I think I might, even though it'll be copyright blocked or claimed, I might play this one clip, which is from, I can trim it out later. For those watching the replay, you may find this jumps because I'm going to actually...
or watch it on Rumble.
I trim something out or watch it on Rumble. It'll never get trimmed out. So I wanted to just show this one clip from the classic albums show of Pete talking about the use of these synths, because it's fascinating stuff. Right, here we go.
The whole thing about this album is the 2 tracks, Barbara O'Reilly and Won't Get Fooled Again, use a synthesizer in a completely different way than anyone had ever used one before, where it actually provides a rhythm. I mean, it's not just a sound, but it's a rhythm as well. To the best of my knowledge, the first time anybody had used a synthesizer like this, first of all, nobody I knew anyway knew how to work them. I mean, they were really difficult to program and get to any kind of sound out of.
When I did the sound for Won't Get Fooled Again, I didn't have this bit. This was a bit that I got during the demos. And so by the time I'd finished the demos, I knew how to work it. But what I did have is a much simpler synthesizer, very much like this one. The one that I actually had, you can see in the photographs, it was with this organ with the EMS synthesizer on the top of it. That was the rig that I used.
So for those watching on the replay, welcome back from that skip.
Right.
So that in itself was revolutionary, the way he used it, and there's other clips where he talks about the fact that he was actually playing that like recording it as he played it, following the song. It wasn't something that he programmed and then just let it go. He was playing that as well as doing the sample and hold stuff. So it was very. It's a synthesizer, it's kind of very organic too, you know. So obviously it took a long time to play around with that to get to that point where he could get that right sound. But it is true at the time you would get a lot of esoteric avant-garde bands using stuff like that, but a mainstream hard rock act coming out with something like that was revolutionary. I mean, even at the time I remember hearing that going, what is that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the guy was obviously very, very forward-thinking, experimenting with anything he could get his hands on to get a different kind of sound.
And because he had his own little studio that we can see there at home, he could record all this stuff and play with it. This is the ARP 2500, which I think is what he was talking about. Some of that gear there. Very self-explanatory, don't you think?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I mean, anybody could use that.
Right. Very self-explanatory, yes.
Well, I mean, this is very much the period of synthesizers where you had to be a damn rocket scientist in order to figure out how to work it, and they broke down at the drop of a hat.
Yeah. I'm sure this thing was still using tubes, right? It's not solid state, that's for sure, right?
Well, the breaking down thing is interesting because there's a lot of clips you can see on YouTube. I can't show on this show right now where they're talking about the tapes. So Bob Pridden, the sound man, said I was in charge of to play these tapes live in order to do these songs, and he'd say they would always break down. First of all, Roger said, well, once the tape was playing, that was it. You were stuck. You couldn't jam or go off script. You had to stick exactly to it. And the Who were not good at sticking to stuff. And then the tape would break. And so that was it. It was all screwed. And then there was a number. Bob Prince says, well, who got the blame for that? Me, the sound guy behind the desk. And so they would be throwing things at him and shouting and screaming, and fists would be flying. And he said they regularly broke down, or they would speed up or slow down.
Yeah,
the band are trying to keep up, and it caused some real problems. I do like that joke from 11 Alpha, from ARP 2500 to AARP. Hope I die before I get older. It's funny. So it caused problems for them live. I mean, clearly in the modern era, it didn't matter. They just had a keyboard player on stage and you play it. But the tapes were always fun for them. And lots of bands had that problem when they had to start using tapes. I don't know why it didn't occur to them to just hire a keyboard player. Maybe they couldn't afford it at the time. But anyway, Pete loved to play about with that stuff, and it did make a big difference. Didn't mean he ignored the guitar work, but it added a whole new element to the Who. Obviously tracks like Babo O'Reilly, which it wouldn't be nearly the same without that.
Well, no, I mean, I doubt you would have heard that track if it hadn't been for that synth intro and how different it was for the time.
Yep, absolutely. And very interesting track because there's so many people think this is called Teenage Wasteland. It's actually Baba O'Reilly, because the term Baba O'Reilly doesn't exist anywhere in the song. It's a kind of a Mayor Baba was Pete's guru, and obviously he wanted to make a little bit of a jig. So and live, because there's a violin on it, but live Roger would play it on the harmonica, I guess. And who's going to trail a violin player around for one song?
Right.
So I don't think he used a Moog, Tim. It was ARP 2500 and EMS synths, and then it was a Lowry organ. So it was an organ fed through those synths to do all the processing. So he actually fed his guitar through it as well on the solo and going mobile and stuff. So rather than using a Moog, he was using the synths to other instruments fed through them, which is one use of them, of course. But you wouldn't get sorry, jumped ahead there. You wouldn't get the same thing going on. But the album itself, before we get into each track, showed the duality of the Who, because their heavy incendiary live sound, very different from a lot of the recorded sound in Who's Next, which it has some heavy stuff, but it's also got melodic, acoustic, sensitive, harmonic stuff on there too. So of course live, when they had to play some of these tracks, they never played live because it just wouldn't have worked, but live they had to completely transform them into some screaming heavy guitar based. And that's fine, So Baba O'Reilly, sung by Daltrey in the verses, but you can hear Pete singing the don't cry, don't shake your eye, whatever, only Teenage Wasteland. That's Pete singing that. The violin solo was done by a guy called Dave Arbus from a progressive rock band East of Eden. So a lot of people like me years ago used to think it was Stefan Grappelli or somebody like that. It wasn't. It was Dave Arbus. He was a prog rock guy, still around as well, I think. So the clip in the montage was Nigel Kennedy, who's quite famous for a while in Britain. Anyway, I don't know about America as a violin player. But
we do. His name is Charlie Daniels.
Charlie Daniels, yes. So and you can hear lyrically though the themes from Lifehouse are in here. Teenage Wasteland. He says it wasn't about teenagers being wasted; it was about the waste of teenage life through this dystopian world. The intersection of humanity and technology. So I guess the synth part works for that. But he creates that repeating synth part, but then let the crashing guitar as well, and Roger's on top form in this. Which CSI was this used for?
It was in one of them. I don't remember which.
I can never remember. Can't remember. Right. Okay. So Vegas was CSI. The original was Vegas. Was Who Are You?
Yeah.
New York was no. Wait a minute. Miami was Won't Get Fooled Again. So I think Miami might have been Won't Get Fooled Again.
Yeah, it was.
Then New York, Baba O'Reilly.
I think it might have been, yeah.
But then didn't they use Eminence Front for one of them too? Like there's been like 18 CSIs now.
Oh yeah, I mean, who can remember after the first 7?
I know the first time I heard Eminence Front, it was on Miami Vice.
Right.
That's when I saw it. I heard that song the first time, and it blew me away. It was during a boat chase.
Indeed.
On that show.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so Pete said, I won all these Emmys for Miami Vice. These are songs I wrote years ago.
Right.
There's no show. I've got this. It's got a shelf full of Emmys. He was happy about the money too. But, so Baba O'Reilly, obviously, as we said, played to death on classic rock radio. But if you really want to, it's a great recorded track. But again, live, it was powerful track live. Especially as it speeds up to incredible speed, ludicrous speed at the end. Bargain is another one I think is an absolute belter on this.
More straight ahead hard rock tune.
Yeah. So it's got that kind of it's got a little bit of kind of acoustic guitar with a little bit of the synth stuff at the beginning, and then it just goes explosive, full on dynamic stuff like the drumming.
For longtime fans of the Who, when you hear them go into that real loud, aggressive chorus, a lot of people who'd never seen them live had never heard that from them before. We're kind of like probably sitting there like, whoa, where did this come from?
Yeah, that's right.
Little they know that's always who the band was. You just never heard it.
Yeah, it's the dynamics of the whole thing. It's the light and shade. So they may have had a lot of shade on stage, but there was light and shade on the record. But I mean, the drumming, again, this is where I was talking about the drumming of Keith earlier. It really, for whatever reason, he only unleashes it when it's required on this track, and it's brilliantly done. It's absolutely top-notch Keith drumming. I mean, incredible. So love it. And it's one that it worked well live too. They could do it live because it has got enough sort of heavy rock guitar in it to work as the live lineup. But sacrifice and the value of spiritual connections is what it's about, over material desires, apparently. So, because Pete was into that stuff, then track 3, Love Ain't For Keeping, shortest track on the album, apparently. It's kind of mellow with a bit of a country vibe, acoustic vibe, although it does have a nice chorus, louder bit in the chorus. And the bass, John's bass is brilliant in this, very melodic. So about the fleeting nature of love. I am not entirely sure, other than maybe the Young Vic sessions where they may have played it, that they've ever played it live. If our friend Legalized Adulthood was here, he would be able to tell me, because he would know. He knows all of them, because they didn't play some of them. They didn't really play live. A couple of the tracks. That's why I had to get the Going Mobile, the Roger Daltrey band with Simon Townsend singing, because there's not many. I think Pete might have played it live a couple of times, but so then John Entwistle's contribution to the album, My Wife, which has nothing to do with Lifehouse, and obviously John is singing on this. He
wrote it.
He wrote it. He'd actually just done his first solo album, and I think the rest of the band must have been saying, "Have you got a track for this album so it isn't all Pete?" I don't know. It's just like, come on, you got to have something. So this was one he wasn't going to put in that album for some reason, and he said it was a bit of a humorous track about marital strife, mainly probably written from reality. Because like he hasn't been home in like 5 days or whatever, and his wife's coming after him. So he kind of threw that one in there. It's got that wonderful brass thing that he recorded. He recorded the brass stuff in it, and then overdubbed all those brass bits, because he actually played brass at school. I think they were in a school. Him and Pete were in school band or something. Again, Legalized would know the details. I'll get something wrong, even though I'm a huge Who fan. I'm bound to say something. I think he and Pete were in a school band together. And John was a brass player. Great bass as well, though. Very funny live. Always worked well. Gave Roger a break from singing. Well, then it just meant he had to stand around on stage hitting a tambourine or something. Right. Sings a little bit at the end, and John always liked to have a couple of tracks.
Knowing Roger, he probably just went to go get a beer during that song.
Just say, man, right, step off stage, couldn't he?
Yeah, go get a beer, get a takeaway curry. The one John track I always like live is Heaven and Hell. Not Heaven and Hell, so Heaven and Hell. It's the first track on Live at Leeds. Heaven and Hell? I think it is. Anyway, so it's a real classic. So it's great lyrics, very funny, and hyperbolic, as it was described at the time. Hyperbolic storytelling. So the song is Over, which was meant to be, it's very much a Lifehouse song. Possibly was meant to be even the end, the closure of the whole Lifehouse thing, last song, given the title. And it's one where Pete and Roger swap the vocals, but it's very melancholy and reflective. It's again one I don't think they performed live ever. The version, the montage, is also Roger Daltrey from a 1994 orchestral tour he did. But it has piano from Nicky Hopkins in it, who played a lot of sessions for a lot of top bands at the time. And then it's got a little bit of synth and orchestration, but kind of a closure, but with hope for the future in the lyrics. So it's a beautiful track, absolutely beautiful. Again, this sensitive side to the band, that if you only knew them from tours of having your eardrums shoveled in,
blasted out, right?
You'd be like, is that the same band? You know? Yeah. And Getting in Tune is an absolute belter. I absolutely love it. Starts really quiet with piano and then grows into the full band. Great vocal from Roger. Search for harmony musically and spiritually. Again, there's the Lifehouse thing, which was about musical notes becoming like an identity.
Musically, I don't know if this was intentional or whether this is production on the album, but it flows very, very well into Going Mobile.
It does. So the song is over, Getting in Tune, Going Mobile, although the song is over may have meant to be in the last and Lifehouse, flow very nicely into each other.
And that's weird that they were written differently for different purposes, but all kind of work together.
So Tim saying the song is over, I want that played at my funeral. That's actually quite an interesting thought, because I think about that a lot. Maybe just because I'm getting older. I actually have a short
you
list.
tend to think about those things when you get to our age. Yeah,
I have a short list of tracks. I hadn't thought of the song is over, but actually would be quite appropriate.
Right?
Yeah, the song is over.
I suppose Won't Get Fooled Again would work too. But
so knowing us, we'd like pre-record a segment for after the ceremony. It's like, what are you still doing here? Funeral's over. Go home.
Right, go home.
Let's go home. Yeah. What an interesting choice. The song is over. Yeah. Lovely track though. Again, I'm not sure if that was played live a lot either. Mainly because there's a lot of piano in it. Nicky Hopkins playing that great piano. So, then Going Mobile, as you mentioned, Getting in Tune goes really nicely to Going Mobile, which is it's Pete singing, and it's really just, as I said earlier, according to the band, it was Pete, John, and Keith playing. They played the track live. There might have been a couple of overdubs towards the end, but it was really the three of them playing live with Pete singing live and just an acoustic guitar. But even though it's just an acoustic, it doesn't feel like it's some kind of whimsical acoustic thing. And the drumming and the bass on it make it absolutely rocket forward, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It really, really sounds like what it is, a road song. It's driving forward, you know? The freedom of the road. Again, Lifehouse, Bohemian, getting on the road was part of the Lifehouse thing, to get out of the virtual reality suit environment and go on the road. So, and there's a little bit of the ARP synthesizer at the end. He fed his guitar through it, and made this kind of guitar solo, but played through the synth. He actually recorded a normal electric guitar solo as well, but they left that out. So I think you can hear it on the deluxe stuff. But great, I love this track. Absolutely love it. And again, not played live for whatever reason, which is why it's hard to get a live version. So I had to use Simon Townsend singing it in the montage, his brother. So if you close your eyes, it sounds like Pete. But then another one of the ones you hear all the time, classic rock radio, Behind Blue Eyes. It's one of the most beloved Who songs for a lot of people. It's kind of, I mean, Roger always loved it because it's about isolation and unsuppressed rage and vulnerability and inner turmoil, and it really allowed him to take that frontman persona. Like a vocal,
you need a singer that can really pull something like this off, and Roger really kind of shines in this one because, like, especially when you kind of like get those bursts of like real anger and resentment in there, you get that snarl in his voice.
Yeah,
and you can really sell that well.
And he was a guy who, as he says himself in interviews, came from the rough parts of London, was a fighter, got thrown out of the Who at one point for fighting. So even though Pete had written it and Pete had his own reasons for writing it, Roger kind of identified with that anger thing and what do you do with it? And he had to get over that. Not the god-awful Limp Bizkit version. God, no. And I've always liked both versions of this. I've liked the live where Pete really gives this fantastic chords on it. Loud chords. But I've always liked the studio version, which I feel is, although it's a little slower, still has those big chords in it and has incredible depth sonically. When you listen to it, it's so well recorded. It's beautifully recorded, fiery climax to it, and then back to this quiet acoustic bit. Stone Cold classic, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, rightfully belongs in their pantheon of immortal classics that they've added to rock and roll.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is another one of the tracks in this album there are no bad tracks, but there are ones that are, if this track was isolated from everything else, you'd still say, what a fantastic record this is. And that's got that dark, light, dark, soft, loud, which works so well. Beautiful stuff.
I mean, there are certain songs on a record where, just for that song being on there, you should own it. And this album has 5 of them, in my opinion.
Yes, indeed. Well, absolutely. I mean, there's no bad tracks, but there are some all-time classics, which is what makes it such a powerful album, in my opinion, and possibly the best rock album of its era. And that's controversial because there's a lot of big stuff.
I had some competition when it came out.
And we'll get into that in a minute. But the last track on the original 9-track album is obviously
the best song on the album. Thank you.
It is. Yeah, I mean,
in a lot of ways,
I think it is. I'm sorry. I love it.
No, I don't disagree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you, Joe. I think it's one of these tracks that we, even devoted Who fans like myself, kind of go, oh yeah, I won't get fooled again. Heard that a million times. TV, classic rock radio. We forget the power of it.
There's a reason why they play it as often as they do.
And
there's a reason why.
That's right. And it's one of those studio tracks where I think they really managed to capture the live power.
Yes. Because I tell you what, when you were mentioning earlier the difference between them and a lot of other bands at the time, you said it earlier. They headlined 3 of the biggest festivals ever where other bands weren't doing it. They are a live band. Yeah, they might be doing great things in the studio, but you can't tell me those 4 guys wouldn't rather be in front of 50,000 people rocking their brains out.
Well, I don't know about Pete. Pete was always pretty grumpy about that stuff. I hate these arenas. I hate these stadiums. I hate these festivals. I hate this. I hate this. He still does it.
Right. Well, there's money involved. So, hey. Yeah. But the rest of them, I mean, come on.
I mean, I've seen The Who a number of times live, and I have to say, I've been lucky because they've played some real bummers, but I've been lucky that never once have I felt they were just going through the through the motions. And like the 2000 tour, when I saw them in Glasgow, John was still alive. Obviously, Pete was on fire that night. I mean, he was loving it. He was like playing like he was Angus Young. It was incredible. He was just burning up, and I thought, this is not a guy who hates performing live. No matter what he says. So,
and the rest of the sound is really, reminiscent of their live stuff. But what really sells it for me is that scream from Roger. That you've never heard anything like that from him before.
I know, it's just it's hard to do that as well. I think we forget just how hard that might be. I thought I'd uploaded that clip.
Well, especially for a trained singer who's supposed to be like under control and intentionally hitting notes the whole time, to just
screeching like that, you end up
just
sounding
undo
like,
everything and just let one go as raw as possible is just not what they do.
But the dynamics of it, the different sections of the song, which are so full of dynamics, you know, the rhythm of the synth, and then Keith kicking in with this phenomenal set of fills leading up to the scream, and then the power of the guitar over the top of that. It just, there's nothing.
And the subject matter of the song is what I love about it. I think
that
it's great.
too, yeah.
I have that.
The message of the song is just based as hell.
Well, it as he said, it's the dystopian part. It's like, don't think I've got all the answers because I'm standing up on stage here. There was another guy standing up before me, and there'll be another guy after me. I don't have the answers. You have the answers. You know, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. So that
I was about to say that very thing right before you did.
you know, and as a lot of Lifehouse was about. Oh, well, we've got this great utopian idea, but he said, but there are consequences to that. It's not just about actions and then utopia. Suddenly you get dystopia. You know, there's consequences. It's I love the way he talks about it. It wasn't all hippy dippy, flower power, utopia, kumbaya. It was,
I like that period. About this period of philosophy and music and culture and things like that, where they understood very clearly that utopias always come with a very sinister side
there's
to them.
Always a cost.
Whether it be books like The Giver or movies like Soylent Green or Logan's Run.
Yeah.
Obviously later in the 70s, but even at this time they were writing stuff like that. They understood that cannot exist without a real price to be paid.
Yeah, exactly. There's actions have consequences, as Pete would say. I think he was also getting at the fact that his generation were supposed to be the ones that would, solve the world with flower power and blah, blah, blah. And it was all bullshit, or at least was allowed to turn to bullshit. So I think
too, by 71, their generation was starting to be the ones in charge and being the ones doing things and actually making things happen.
Yeah.
So, and none of the things they talked about were happening. So I think they kind of saw that, and that's where the kind of meet the new boss, same as the old boss cynicism comes in.
Indeed. And I don't know what I've done with that clip. I had the clip of the Roger scream, but it seems to have disappeared into the ether.
Not that.
That's a real shame. What the hell?
That's an iconic moment in this song. And
wait a minute. Hang on. No, here it is. I found it. So we'll just show that one little clip. Here we go. Well, I mean, that's raw power.
Yeah, and you're telling me the dude sliding on his knees doesn't like to play live. Come on, man. He's perpetrating. Come on, Brian.
So that's the footage filmed at Shepperton for the Kids Are All Right documentary movie. And I was watching that again this week. And I was watching that ending, and I've got clips of it in the montage.
Yeah.
It actually brings tears to my eyes when I watch that. Mm-hmm. Watching this, and then that was filmed in 79. It was a bit later, but just the power, 78, 79, just the power of that band. Mm-hmm. And that was Keith Moon's last live performance. It was just phenomenal. It just actually brings me to tears when I watch it. It's like, oh God, look at that. It's a band at the peak of their power, Mm-hmm. But beautiful recording. I mean, all that great synth thing again, that rhythm that's created. There's no soloing, and the bit where it just goes to that, and they had the laser show on stage. It's just hypnotic.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing they were headliners by this point, because I would not want to have gone on the stage after these.
Come
guys.
on, man.
Yeah,
it sucks compared to that.
Imagine the Who touring with Herman's Hermits or whatever it was.
Right. And then they end the stage with they end their set with "Won't Get Fooled Again." I'd just be sitting there backstage like, we're fucked.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. How are we going to follow that? Yeah. But the drumming, phenomenal. The primal scream, the guitar, Pete absolutely ringing. He played the lead guitar track on that, not the chord riffing, but the lead stuff that's all through that. played it all just kind of like in one go. Yeah, he tidied it up later, but he played it live in one go. And live, I mean, if you see them live, it's not so much. Now it's different because they're older and Pete's deaf, and I've got a clip about that actually. Pete's deaf. I've got a funny
set for a lead guitar track where you just go with it and do it in one take, and obviously clean it up later. Because I know Viv Campbell, when he was playing with Dio, used to do that on every track.
Yeah,
so you get that kind of raw emotional feel.
His hearing's always been screwed since that amp blew up next to him, right?
Well, that was part of it, but obviously playing at 120 decibels and hitting the Guinness Book of Records for being the loudest band has some impact. And funny you should mention that, because I have a clip from the Kids Are All Right movie, and again, this may get claimed, so I'll have to remove it. This is Keith and Pete.
Only 10 seconds. You're all right, man.
Oh, this is a little longer than 10 seconds, but it's funny. This is him Pete talking about his hearing. He went to his doctor to get a hearing test.
When I went to get my ears tested, I thought it was really encouraging, apart from the fact he said I had terrible ears. He said, Bill said to him, well, what advice would you give him? Would you tell him to stop playing entirely and leave the group? Throw his career out the window? Become a pauper? Starve? Would you tell him that? Well, no, actually, no. But I would advise him to learn to lip read. It's true. That's what he said.
Learn to lip read.
Oh, that's great, man.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, God. I mean, there was a lot of strife in the Who, but they were funny as hell at times as well. They were just funny guys. But what a wonderful track to finish the album on, and total masterpiece. I mean, there's a reason.
In its front, it's my favorite one.
There's a reason it's played so much.
The Who is, there's a bunch of prog rock bands from the late 60s and early 70s who are really kind of like pretentious art school douche nozzles who like really just got way, way too into it. And these guys are just a bunch of lads from London who just love playing music and just did it.
Yeah.
And did it better than most of the bands who trained their whole lives to do it and took it really seriously.
Yeah, and they actually did the thing that bands said they were doing, didn't always do. They did progress. They became something different and better even. They didn't just go, oh yeah, we've got a formula, that's it. They were, this band in 71 is something else. They're a very different animal. And possibly a different animal from any other band, that's for sure. So, but yeah, I mean, there was a few other tracks. So Pete said about the album, we got a quote from him, he said, "This is the best non-concept album based on a concept album ever made."
That's great.
Oh, yeah, I'll do George Harrison for sure one day. Absolutely, I'm a big George man. So, but yeah, there's various, as you can see from this. This is from I think the 2003 version of the album. It's got the New York Record Plant sessions and the Young Vic live sessions, and there's certain tracks on there that are not on the album. So, because there was about 20, plus there was a couple of covers that they were playing live just at the Young Vic just for fun or whatever. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other tracks that didn't make it because they're quite interesting. But that means I got to figure out. Oh, here we go. So this wasn't, The Seeker is not part of Lifehouse. It was nothing to do with Lifehouse, but it's a single they released in 1970. The Who had a bunch of tracks. They were forever recording stuff for a proposed album or EP, and that it would never happen. So they had tracks left over all over the place, which is why they have such great compilation albums. So they had a series of singles that were not on albums. This one is The Seeker from March 1970. I love this track. There's bits of it were involved with. It was kind of a Tommy Hangover-ish. There's little elements of it were Tommy-esque, but it's Pete's spiritual journey. But if you've never heard The Seeker, seek it out because it's a real neat track, fabulous single.
And with that habit, they're lucky they were around back in this era, not in the modern day, because they'd be one of those bands you see on Spotify that craps out a single every 6 months or so, and they never actually release a damn album.
That's right. Who kind of got stuck in that a little bit because they were always trying to, we'll do 4 tracks for an EP, and then it never happened. So, but they still had the tracks. The Seeker's been covered by a lot of bands as well. It's a really, really nice track. Great mix. It's a great rocker, kind of mid-tempo rocker. But then another track which was definitely intended for Lifehouse, recorded in October 71, was Let's See Action, which again I was listening to just again today. It's another of my favorite non-album Who tracks. Odds and Sods, as Tim says, a lot of these turned up with an album called Odds and Sods, which was released in I think 74, around about then. Another great kind of mid-tempo rocker with the you can hear the lyrical when you listen to the lyrical influence of Lifehouse, and then there was Joined Together with the band. Yeah, brilliant. So with a fantastic rumbling bass in it, sort of neat little mouth harp stuff in it, and harmonica from Roger. But really great track live, really good. Again, intended for Lifehouse. Released in June 72, kind of leftover. Then another one, Relay, which was another one which was just a single, also intended for Lifehouse at some point. But also another cancelled Who album, which they called Rock is Dead, Long Live Rock. So they ended up recording the song Long Live Rock, but the album never happened. Long Live Rock being one of my all-time favorite Who songs. It's an absolute belter of a rocker. Released as
that's kind of sad in a way, though, that you have this absolute killer track for an album that never existed.
Yeah, it's right. Like it's like,
well, what did the rest of the record sound like? Give me that.
But Long Live Rock, which I've got this 7-inch single, I've got it. It finally turned up on the Quadrophenia 79 Quadrophenia soundtrack from the movie Quadrophenia. It was on side 4 where they chucked a bunch of odds and sods on. And this was on there. It was released as a single in some European countries back in the early 70s. But just when I first heard it, and I wasn't aware of that, and I heard it in 79, I went, my God, this is the Who. This is incredible. When did they record this? Well, it was like sitting in the can since 72, you know.
I feel like that should have been like a job for not even just the Who, but a lot of bands from this era. They had so much material that didn't make it onto an album.
Yeah. That
they could just create entire albums out of compilations that got left off of other stuff.
Yeah. I do love the song Long Live Rock. It's just so good. I actually quite like the New Seekers, Tim. That's a different story altogether. Beg, Steal or Borrow. A couple of they had a lot of hits in the early 70s in Britain, the New Seekers. I'd like to teach the world to sing. That was the New Seekers. The Coke advert, you know.
Okay.
Another track which absolutely should have been on Who's Next because it fits perfectly, and it was the central theme of Lifehouse. Was a track called Pure and Easy, and it's about that universal vibration of the perfect note, the mystical note, which was the absolute central to Lifehouse. For some reason, even though they recorded it, it never ended up on Who's Next, but it would have been the great 10th track in it. It's weird because it's a wonderful track and it fits perfectly.
And with the runtime on Who's Next, they had room for another track.
They could have squeezed another track in, I think, and it should have fitted in that middle section where they all flowed together.
Yeah, and if you had to shorten up Won't Get Fooled Again by 30 seconds or whatever, you can cut 30 seconds out of that song and still have an absolute classic.
Exactly. So this track, I feel, is the one that should have been on Who's Next that wasn't. It's a beautiful track. Absolutely gorgeous. It's just about that mystical note, you know. The once was a note so pure and easy. It's a beautiful, lovely track. So another one which was on the B-side, released on the B-side of the single Joined Together, was one of the Record Plant recordings when they were in New York. Baby Don't You Do It, the old Marvin Gaye song, which the Who had tackled a few times live. Leslie West played lead guitar on it. Leslie West of Mountain.
Okay.
When they were in New York, jammed with them. great, really great rocker. If you go online and to YouTube and listen to it, Maybe Don't You Do It by the Who, brilliant rocker, some great guitar interchange between the two guys. So they did it, and they did play it live in those Young Vic sessions. Naked Eye, which was kind of post Tommy. In fact, some of it's in the Tommy live performances, and then pre Lifehouse. It's also on Odds and Sods, but it ends up on the Who's Next bonus tracks. Naked Eye, which is another much undervalued rocker. It ends up being a very impressive rocker at the end by Pete. It's when you see the Who playing it live, it's a phenomenal track. But again, just kind of threw it away almost,
That sounds like something I would do with a band, with any band I was in charge of, is throw a song out there that we've written but it's never been recorded yet, and start playing it on the live album for the previous record. Yes. Like, wait, what album's that on? Like, all the fans are like, wait, where did this come from? I've never heard this before. No, you haven't.
Indeed. So they did there was a couple of others. There was a track called Too Much of Anything, which ended up in the bonus tracks in 95. And then there's I Don't Even Know Myself, which was recorded multiple times by the Who in various forms, and then ended up on the bonus tracks in 95 of Who's Next. And it was a B-side to I Won't Get Fooled Again. There was another track that they did. There's another version of Behind Blue Eyes, which they recorded at the record plant. And it's it's got Al Cooper playing Hammond organ on it. And it's beautiful.
I've heard that version. That one is excellent.
Again, you can hear it on YouTube if you want, if you don't have the bonus tracks in the album. Beautiful Hammond organ on it, and it's very different because there wasn't a lot of Hammond organ on a lot of Who stuff, so very enjoyable indeed. So look out for that one.
Purple influence from that era.
Yeah. So that was just some of the sort of odds and sods. It's funny, they did end up as an album, a lot of them on the album Odds and Sods. But yeah, they were it's interesting. They were a very prolific band in terms of recording, just didn't put a lot of it out. It's just like, what are you doing?
Like John Fogerty even, right?
Yeah, we'll just do an album every few years. We're okay. We'll record all these tracks though.
That had to be frustrating as hell for like the super fans that like followed them around on tour, because they saw all of this stuff happen on live, and they're like, oh yeah, this is going to come out on their next album. It's going to be great. And then it doesn't. You're like, what? What did you do with all this? I know what happened. I was there.
Yeah.
Well, it's one thing to have like Sammy Hagar has a song called Red that has he ever recorded it? I don't think he's ever recorded it, but he plays it live, right?
Live, yeah.
And that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is these have been all tested live, and they're promising to record them, and they're not. What the hell?
Like, these are like entire albums worth of material that they've just never recorded.
There are a few bands do that. I mean, I know that McCartney has a couple of tracks that he would play live in, like Soily is a great track. He used to play live with Wings, and it's a great hard rocker. Never recorded a studio version of it, ever. Just played it live. It was weird.
And of course, in the pre-internet era, that could be like kind of a special treat for the people who took the time and showed up to see you play live. Is, they get to hear some new stuff or some unique stuff that you don't ever record.
Well, back in the day, we traded tapes, bootleg tapes of gigs.
Oh, yeah. But look, let me tell you something, man. My dad owned a record store from I think it was around 82 to right around the turn of the century. He made more money selling bootleg vinyl than he did anything else.
I've got a few.
He said he'd have guys coming in, military dudes coming in with a wallet full of money to buy Cure stuff and things like that,
And that back in the day, that's how you got that stuff. You couldn't. There was no internet to download it from, and so people. I've got a lot of bootleg vinyl records, like all this Beatles stuff that got reworked for Anthology and all these other things. If you wanted to hear that stuff before then, you had to buy a bootleg vinyl of it that someone had leaked from the studio's tapes that were left over. And
the underground metal scene kind of evolved from that, in that these bands never would have made it out of their local scene otherwise. Their demo tapes and bootlegs just kind of floated around the underground, and everybody would just eventually, like, there's this famous story of Hellhammer where by the time their first, their EP got recorded, the band had been gone for a decade. And they got contacted by this record producer who's like, hey, I want to actually record this and put it out on CD. Are you guys okay with that? And they're like, they were already Celtic Frost by that time. So they're like, yeah, okay.
Sure. We'll take the money. Sure.
So just before we get to talk about some of the competition that they faced in that era, again, I'll probably end up trimming this out for copyright purposes. This is the 82 tour, which this is in Toronto, but I saw them on that tour in England, which was meant to be the final tour ever. No, there's no such thing in rock as final tour ever. This is a Long Live Rock from that. Don't know if you can hear it or not.
We can hear it.
Yeah.
These goons.
As I say, I'll probably get claimed to hell, but what the hell, I'll trim it later. This 82 tour was actually underappreciated, even by me at the time.
Well,
because Eminence Front, the version from this tour, live, phenomenal.
I imagine.
And of course, they had a keyboard player on stage. So
yeah, now they got a keyboard player. Yeah,
Rabbit Bundrick, I think. So anyway, yes, just thought I'd play a little bit of that again. That'll just get me claimed to hell. But great track. So the competition at the time, and there was a lot of it. I mentioned Hunky Dory, David Bowie earlier. Was one of the albums that was out in '71. LA Woman by the Doors.
Oh well,
another
gee
big
whiz.
one. This one was out.
That's a wee album that some people might know.
November '71, Led Zepp 4. So a little bit after Who's Next.
What is it with bands and their fourth album, man? They just nuke it.
The famous fourth album. Yeah. This was interesting because the Who and Led Zeppelin had a famous antagonistic rivalry. Pete particularly is not or never was a fan of Led Zeppelin. He said it many times. Not a fan, whatever. And he also was a little bit bitter that they kind of took on the, well, we're the guys that invented the hard rock template, whereas he felt the Who had been doing it before them.
And he's right.
And he's kind of right. But anyway, there was always a lot of aggro between the two bands. I don't know why. But this was out after Who's Next. Outsold it, but still, this is what they were up against. I think you see rock music changing in both these albums. Aqualung from that famous heavy metal.
My God, man. 71. Oh. Good Lord. Yeah.
Heavy metal winner, Grammy winners, 1980, whatever. But,
still haven't forgiven them for that.
So this was also out in March '71, so it'd been out for a few months, but big album in the year. And this was again a band that they would be on the touring circuit with and coming up against a lot. Pink Floyd were only at the stage of Medal in '71. Medal was out in November '71. It wasn't until the following year, I think, that Dark Side of the Moon was out. Was it '72? Am I getting mixed up? It's so far. So Medal, they were still in their psychedelic noodling phase to a certain extent. But I mean, a lot of interesting keyboard stuff going on in there. So Sticky Fingers was the big Stones album of that year. And it was a big one, April '71, Sticky Fingers. So this was the competition. This the Who, the Stones, Zeppelin, all high level.
And those were all their contemporaries, and then you had a whole bunch of up-and-comers from, a little-known genre at the time called heavy metal.
Well, we're about to touch on that. So, Metal, of course, had One of These Days I should have remembered to mention, which is obviously a famous Pink Floyd track with lots of synthy noodling on it and tons of great guitar. Sticky Fingers, huge album. This album was out in 71, August of 71. Direct competition with Who's Next.
So it's the same month even. That's got...
Yeah.
Man, if I was sitting between those two records, I don't know which one I'd pick, to be perfectly honest with you. And I'm the metal guy. Like, Master of Reality should be a no-brainer for me, but Who's Next is right there.
So imagine if you were going into a record store as a
Who was the lead singer, by the way? Just out of curiosity, this band had like 3 of them.
Tony Martin.
The Ozzy era.
Okay. Tony Martin. No,
right.
Ozzy. This is firmly in the Ozzy era. Yeah. Imagine being a teenager or even a younger kid with limited cash in August 71, and you're going into the store and you got to pick one of those 2 albums. That would have been tough.
You might have had some sticky fingers like the Rolling Stones.
Oh yeah.
Indeed. So oops, sorry, let's not show my email. Master Debaters of Reality. But that was 71. What else was there? Oh yeah. Shoot. That keeps coming up on the wrong screen. I'm going to get rid of it. Let me get rid of it. There we go. Oops. Making noises too. What else was there? A couple more that were out in that era. Fireball was the Deep Purple album of that time, July 71, so just before that. Not necessarily their best album. Big album for the year, though.
Deep Purple.
And John Lennon's Imagine was out at that time, so very different. So there was still Beatles stuff, Stone stuff, Who stuff. And of course, Paul had my favorite sheep-oriented album in Ram. So that was the competition. I don't know. I mean, I mentioned L.A. Woman by the Doors was a big album that year. There was a few others. Marvin Gaye had a bit of What's Going On. I think What's Going On might have been out. But I was thinking more rock. I mean, yeah, rock obviously, but rock competition. But I think Who's Next stands up, can keep its head up in that competition, worthy in that competition. So.
But the fact that all of those bands were coming out with that stuff. Oof.
Yeah. Indeed.
There's a reason why my dad, when we were kids, we went to Stan the Man's record shop every Saturday, and he always left with a couple of albums. He always did. It was either that place or another place called Sutos. It stood for Something Out of the Ordinary. Oh, and I always wanted to go to that one because they had these huge tree trunk speakers. They were cut out of tree trunks. It looked like something out of Lord of the Rings. It was really cool. They had one on either side of the store. Nice. It was neat.
So Tim was saying he'd sent me a link. I'm going to look through this later, mate. Maybe there's a show potential in this. There's albums that should exist. And there's obviously
should exist. Oh my God!
Yeah, there's obviously a huge list. Kenny Rogers in concert, of course.
Hey man, I listened to the '70s channel on Sirius a lot, and I heard The Gambler today. And you know what else I heard? What else did I hear by Kenny?
Well, First Edition. I just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in.
The Coward of the County. I heard that one today.
Okay. Electric Orchestra BBC sessions. This is very interesting, Tim. Thank you for sending this to me. I'm going to take a good look through it at my leisure because there's thousands of things on here.
Right.
What have we got? The Beatles.
Did I ever tell you I was actually related to Kix Brooks by marriage once?
Did you say that? Yeah. I can't remember.
Yeah, they're cousins. My second wife and him are cousins.
So I'm definitely going to look through that later, mate. Thanks for sending that. I appreciate it. So that was That was a gallop through Who's Next, which obviously I'm a huge Who fan. What gave it away? I don't know. Maybe the posters. Maybe the posters in the background.
It was the T-shirt. I don't know.
And a collection. I was just looking through all. I've got tons of magazines I've collected over the years with the Who and them, books and stuff. Nowhere near as much as Legalized Adulthood, our good friend there, who has got much stuff.
A plethora
of stuff. He has a plethora.
A plethora.
So that was, what a great album. Love the Who. Love that album.
Yeah, they're great. And look, you've got certain rock bands, and then you've got guys that are just a cut above everybody else, and I put them in that category. Just listening to you talk about Pete Townsend and the stuff he was playing with, I mean, it reminds me of Buddy Holly in the 50s doing stuff that nobody was doing at the time,
Yeah, he was
way
really
ahead of
into
his
production.
time,
he would have been a major producer in later years.
But what I mean is he was that kind of pioneer.
He was into the studio. Yeah, he knew how to use the studio, and he wanted to expand that. Yeah, it's such a waste, such a shame.
Well, like we said too, I mean, you have those bands that, don't get me wrong, they're still legends in their own right and absolute classics of the genre, but they find that sound that's theirs, that works for them, and then they stick with it. And I think it takes a different type of talent to continue innovating and continue pushing that boundary every time, for no other reason than to see how far you can take it and what you can do with that sound. And I think the Who really started showing that ability on this record.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I mean, they'd already taken things forward live to levels other bands hadn't seen, and then Tommy was an incredible. It's an incredible album to listen to because it's actually a lot of acoustic and melodic stuff in that album, but beautifully recorded. So they already had taken stuff forward in the studio, but then they had this Olympic studio set up with more tracks than they'd ever seen before, and great gear and a great engineer in Glyn Johns. It was just a perfect storm to create this beautiful album. And it'll be, people will still be talking about it years from now. So yeah, hundreds of years from now. Well, I don't know about that.
Anyway, aren't they talking about Mozart still?
People like Mozart and Beethoven
probably. He's done something that nobody else has done. It will be remembered forever. Yes.
What, wasn't Mozart the villain in The Last Action Hero?
Well, yes.
I thought it was Amadeus. I think
Mozart. Anyway, that's Who's Next. Nice to get around to talking. It's always nice to talk about just one album because you try to tackle a whole band that's like that, So I would like to thank everyone for being here. Thank you guys for being on the panel. Appreciate it very much. So there will be some changes. First of all, we're not doing a show next week. I've decided I want a day off.
Neither am I. Yeah.
I'm going to take some time off.
It's the holidays.
After discussing it with She Who Must Be Obeyed and others, I actually think we may be switching back to Monday afternoons, I hate to say.
Well, cool.
Wednesday night isn't necessarily working out for me on a domestic basis and various other reasons. So I think we may, with the chat's indulgence, switch back to Monday afternoon shows again. We've tried the Wednesday evening experiment and it's been fun, but I think we may go back to our traditional time slot, and I think hopefully you guys are able to make it. So that's
I'll make it. I may not be there for the whole show, but I'll be there.
Well, we're sticking around for 2 hours at least. So that will be, more details of that will be forthcoming, everybody. And there will be no show next week. I am doing a show next Monday with the Rock and Roll Rowdies on their channel, though. Just a little Christmas special for those guys. They'll talk about their Christmas.
I'm sure they've got stories about the Who.
Well, they actually didn't really work. Well, I think Mal might have worked with the Who in the 2000 tour. But I think they didn't really work with the Who. The Who had their own kind of close-knit bunch, so close-knit bunch of like Bob Pridden and guys like that. So they certainly would know those guys. So Monday on the Rock and Roll Rowdies channel, they were talking about Christmas touring experiences and some of their favorite Christmas songs. It's the closest I'll get to doing a Christmas stream, I think, because I'd really, even though I've got some lights up, and I've got my Scottish Santa on the wall behind me. Don't think I'll be doing too much, and my Sabaton Christmas sweater, of course, which is currently on the ground. So when we come back, I'm not sure whether it'll be the following Monday from that. It may be the first show back on the Monday schedule, or it may be the one after. And neither am I particularly sure of the topic. That's why I need some time off. But there'll be some impromptu streams, I'm sure. Maybe do a little bit of gaming, play some tunes, a couple of videos to produce. And tomorrow night I'll be on Comics Division as usual. Pope, my friend, what have you got coming up?
Well, in addition to my usual Midnight Mass show, which will be at 11 on Saturdays as usual, I promise it's happening this time. Last week I was absolutely just dead from work, so I didn't get a chance to do it. But it's been 2 weeks since I've done a full 2-hour show, so we're going to do it this week. In addition to that, on Sunday over on Vinyl Revival's channel, I believe we were talking some Queen, so that should be fantastic.
Oh man, yeah, that thread went off the other day when we started talking about that. Oh my god, yeah.
But that should be a fantastic.
I don't know how you're going to cover we're going to cover the entirety of Queen.
I think that's going to need a part 2.
Right.
Otherwise, we'll be there for 6 hours.
Yeah.
And then I have another Rock and Roll Religion that's going to be coming out. All my stuff is over on Rumble forevermore, because I do actually like to play the music that we're talking about so you guys can hear it.
Yeah.
This one will be with at least one other person, probably two, on the German powerhouse that is Warlock. So that will be awesome.
Nice. Very nice. Love it. Thanks for being here, mate. Joe, my friend, what's in your packed schedule?
Man, you know what? It's going to get unpacked. I just finished the last commission I had. That's why I was listening to Sirius earlier today. I was hard at work at that art board. Delivered those tonight, and she enjoyed them. But I'm going to be doing my regular shows, except for the panel show I do on Wednesdays, the one before this. That one's not coming back till January 8th. Because the Wednesdays it's Christmas Day, it's New Year's Day, and
I'm off.
Those guys, they're going to be busy with their families. I mean, I may jump on for an impromptu stream or something, but the schedule's there. I'm just here to hang with you, man. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm sorry I was late, but with us doing shows back to back, I've got to shut it down.
No, I appreciate you being here at all, mate. Thank you. Yep. Thank you both for your support over this year and other years. It's been
no problem.
Means a lot to me. Trust me.
As ever, man.
And thank you to everyone in the chat. Yeah, if you can't make it to the Rowdies show on Monday over on their YouTube channel, then I hope you all have a great Christmas and New Year. I probably will pop up to do some impromptu stuff and a couple of videos that I'm trying to get out, and I've been trying to get out for weeks.
I don't do videos, man. I hate that, man.
I like it.
Editing is a pain in the ass.
It is a pain, but I really want to get them out. I really want to get some Korean stuff.
Well, that's why you got more subscribers than all of us too, man, because you put out videos. I don't.
I got some Korean stuff I want to talk about. So it's
Speaking of Korean stuff, hang on a second, real quick before we get out of here. I finally am watching the Squid Game for the first time.
I'm going to do a quick preview of season 2 at some point.
I had to do it because one of the guys on my stream says we've got to do Squid Game when it comes out the day after Christmas.
How far in are you?
I'm just about there. I just got done with the episode where
what do you think?
I think there's like 3 of them left. Well, first of all, look, half of these guys are degenerate gamblers, and you know my history with that. So I was like, great. I've got nobody to root for in this son of a bitch.
You don't.
But the subplots are pretty cool. I like the cop. I like what he's doing.
Cop's great, and he's in some good stuff on his own and other shows. Yeah, he's done some great shows.
Yeah. So I've only got a couple episodes left.
Well, he'll be back. The cop will be back.
Oh, I'm sure.
So the front man, who's Lee Byung-hun, and the guy Gong Yu, who's in the train station recruiting people, they're all back next year. Because obviously they weren't taking part in the games, so they're still alive.
Yes, they're still alive. Yeah.
So it was one of the shows that really got me into Korean stuff. So I do want to talk about it. I will be talking about it.
It's okay. I mean, I understand why you guys enjoy it so much, but as soon as I saw half of these dudes are gamblers, I'm like, you do know I'm working at a gambling rehab, and you suggested this show to me. Come on, man.
Think of it more as a dystopian.
I know it's
slaughter fest.
I could tell right away it was entertainment for rich folks. I knew that's what it was. I was like, come on.
I just love the games and the whole thing. Like the first one where they're upstairs and when they have to freeze and they don't.
Red light, green light.
Going on.
We've played that how many times, right? And these guys can't do it. They just get blown away left and right.
I found it hilarious.
They're shitting their pants the whole time.
So I will be because December 26th, Boxing Day, December is the season 2, and I'm going to see a Korean movie in Christmas Eve, so I've got some Korean stuff to talk about.
But what I hate is they don't have anything to go see for Christmas.
That's why I'm going to see a Korean movie.
Yeah,
Harbin.
I'm going to end up going to see Mufasa because my wife's a big Lion King fanatic.
Oh well, good luck with that.
Well, I want to see Nosferatu. I'm looking forward to seeing that movie. I'm a big vampire fan. I love the lore.
Yeah, that should be
I'm not going to see it on Christmas Day. Come on, man.
Who releases a vampire movie on Christmas Day?
Who releases a vampire movie on Christmas Day?
I don't think that's so much a bad idea. Seems all right to me.
Look, man.
That seems like the kind of idea that if you brought it up to your boss, they just look at you like, "What are you high?
What are you smoking? What are you smoking?" That's it. Yeah. Exactly. I'll go see it on December 26th. I'm not saying it's not going to do good. I'm just saying on Christmas Day, I don't think it's going to do that well.
Well, Christmas Day, I intend to do 3/5 of fuck all. So
right.
Anyway, once again, thank you to the chat for all your support here and over on YouTube and over on Rumble. I will see you all soon. If I don't see you before Christmas, have a great Christmas, everybody. And just keep on rocking. So till next time, stay well. Rock till you drop.